Welcome back. I've got Chris Zdenek. I'm like, Chris, how are you?
I'm good. Good morning.
Good morning. Been looking forward to this. This is going to be a two-part episode, folks. So make sure you stay tuned for both. We'll make sure that we have the links in the show notes for both episodes. So in case you pick it up in part two, you go, what are they talking about? Here's part one. So, Christopher, why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this conversation.
Sure. I was formerly trained as an architect. That's, you could say, where this journey started. And most architects know that, and some regular people will know that famous chairs are often in museums, and those were often designed by architects. And back when I was in like the last year or two of graduate or architecture school, I was introduced to basically biomechanics and anatomy from a physical therapist from Stanford University, who we were having like a family Christmas, Thanksgiving dinner or something. And she started talking about how hard it was for her to find a good car because all the car seats were basically damaging, hurtful to her anatomy. She was a special case because she had scoliosis. But anyway, she went on a whole thing for that dinner, a good half of it, on everything that was wrong with standard chair designs. And she went from the car to the dining room chair to office chairs and on and on. And I found that very interesting because as an architect, you sit a lot. And as I said previously, many chairs that are famous and sitting in museums are designed by architects. And what I noticed as she was describing everything is none of them did what she was saying. So it's like all the chairs were designed, but not good for human beings. And this was getting especially important because computers had been invented, home office computers a few years before, because this was back in 85, probably. And yeah, so I sat with that, and a bunch of funny things happened. Like I was in Europe with my father, and relatives asked what I was doing, and I suddenly thought about saying, "Oh, I'm thinking about chairs." And next thing you know, we're on a tour of a chair factory in Switzerland. So the thing didn't let me go, and eventually, by 1990 or so, I was designing prototypes, doing a business plan, and all of that. And I'll get into kind of one of the things that I use as a big market analysis tool, which will be part two of this interview, that made me understand that this would be a good business opportunity.
You see in homes, like, example, if somebody has, their living room, but they also have a family room, which you're not allowed in except for special gatherings and things like that. And you'll see the special chairs and they're like, oh yeah, those chairs are great. But you watch your elderly loved ones sit in the chair for a little bit and then they get out of it and they're in pain and they're hurting and they're having a difficult time getting up. And we just thought, it's just because their body's old and it's sore, which could be an element of that. But they've been sitting in chairs that weren't designed for humans forever, which is ironic, but it makes sense because I've been to museums and you see old furniture and you're like, boy, that would be uncomfortable to sit in for 8 hours a day or longer. And thankfully, there's people in the world like you that recognized that and went, wait, we have to do something about this, and just it started off with a conversation with somebody that had some challenges and car seats, and they're all, it's a standard car seat. And when you were mentioning that story, I was thinking, so my dad and several family members worked in the auto sector for a long time, so I'm thinking, okay, wouldn't it be nice if they could design, because they can do custom build anything, have a
Yeah.
custom built seat for somebody so they could be comfortable in their vehicles. Okay, here's the dimensions, get yourself measured. There's all kinds of ability to do that now, and get all those measurements, just like they do whenever you have an ergonomic assessment when you go to work. They do the ergonomics on your desk, your height,
Sure.
elbow dimension, all that kind of stuff. Even to the point where I worked for an executive search firm years and years ago, and We all had to wear headsets for calls and things like that. But what they did is they actually had a company that would make custom ear molds based
Yeah,
on your ear, and you
yeah,
wear that, so you could wear the thing all day, and your ear wouldn't hurt because it was naturally contoured to your ear.
yeah.
And when I left the company, I said, well, I don't really need this anymore because I don't think I'll be working, and have a headset, with this. And they're like, well, you need to take that because that's your ear. So it's like,
Right, right, right.
this is not going to fit anybody else. But just thinking about that and the day-to-day things that we live in, and we go, okay, here's furniture, here's this, here's that. But when there's someone that has scoliosis or other conditions that make sitting uncomfortable, we want to make it as comfortable as possible. So I think it's such a great way. And as you're talking about that, I start thinking about, okay, architect, design, shapes, what the reason why things are designed the way that they are. But it seems like when it came to furniture and seating, um, especially in modern era, they didn't invite the architect to the table, and I think that was a mistake. Uh, great story to lead into some things. So this work, so let's continue on the conversation then, because it's like, okay, 1990, and which I don't feel is that long ago, but when we do the math, it kind of is. But just what have you seen over the last 2 to 3 decades, which has made you pleased with where things are, and what are some things you wish were better along or further along than they are?
Sure. So, as an architect, you learn this really great phrase: form follows function. And the tragedy of the whole thing with ergonomics, chair design, home office setups is that the people mostly involved in selecting or designing the products have very little to no formal training in anatomy. So the primary function of supporting a human being for optimal performance, and then on the other end of the continuum, you could say injury prevention, really can't get a fair shake or a good inclusion in the whole process. It's like, for centuries, decades at least, doctors didn't really talk to you about nutrition. Yet, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said, let food be thy medicine. But they don't get a nutrition education, so they can't tell you about like the medicinal properties of food, which would keep you healthier far longer if you did that correctly. So very similar with chairs. And knowing all that, I ended up designing some chairs based on these very specific anatomical principles and understandings. And then in Silicon Valley, where I was, I got lucky that I got introduced to a medical group that was noted as being most successful at treating people for repetitive strain injuries. And one of the people they treated was a senior vice president at a Fortune 100 corporation who was, CEO favorite, hard driving, super successful woman. And one day she was walking down the hallway and with her coffee cup in her hand, having a conversation, and her coffee cup just fell right out of her hand. Coffee all over the floor. She was embarrassed and shocked. And well, it wasn't really a surprise because her hand had been hurting progressively more and more for months. And she ignored it because she was a very typical Silicon Valley successful person, hard driving, focused on the performance, and just ignore the body, right? And that's very common and really detrimental to all of us to ignore our bodies. Because as Jim Rohn would say, no health, no wealth. You can have all the money in the world, but once your health is compromised, you'll give all that money away to get your health back if you have to, you know? So we ended up designing these chairs to the very specific details of these doctors who were using biofeedback, of all things. Biofeedback for the muscles. They would put sensors on people's shoulder muscles and train them how to do their work, whether it was holding a coffee cup, typing on a keyboard, mousing, with the least amount of tension in their shoulder muscles possible. And they had this biofeedback equipment, which made people suddenly aware of, oh, wow, I'm using my muscle and it's tight or I'm not. Because the information is on the screen, the little graph is going up and down, high, 100 microvolts is tense muscle, 2 microvolts or less is a relaxed muscle. Why is that important? Because it determined blood flow to your arms and hands and wrists. The tension in your shoulder when it was all tight, and a lot of your viewers will really go, oh yeah, I have these muscles in my back, or these knots in my neck or my upper shoulder, and they really hurt. Well, that's the root cause of ends up with pains in the wrist, migraines, and a variety of other things. The second root cause is actually your posture. And for people that don't know and are maybe lucky that they haven't had any problems, good posture is really one of the most significant factors on our health of just about anything we can do for ourselves, because it affects our breathing as well as the alignment of everything, which affects our blood flow as well. And I got lucky again, I was able to hang out with a head of radiology at a major university, and he could put people in all these scanners in any way he wanted. And he'd put them in different postures. And his goal was to study the blood flow as you were in different postures. And he could slice and dice with the software of the computer any part of the body, and he could see what was the blood flow in the carotid artery or the leg artery or anywhere you wanted. And he'd have people in postures out, forward head, back head, all kinds of things. And wow, very clearly, when your head was forward and you were looking at your monitor or you were driving and doing that and all these things, it was, again, cutting off blood to your brain and your arms. So all these things end up having really significant, massive effects on not just your lower back, which is kind of what traditionally the chair designers and chair selectors of the world kind of focused on. Because as you were saying, you put your grandparents in a chair and they get up and they're sore and, oh my God, what the heck was happening there? It ends up like I'm sitting in a chair right now that has a very narrow backrest. Nothing's interfering with my shoulder blades, right? So I'm reclined back a little bit as well. So gravity is my friend and it's pushing my shoulders back, right? And this is opening my entire chest area. So I'm able to breathe more deeply. And again, another massive effect that just a chair design can do. So if anybody's walking around with the illusion that, it's just a chair, no big deal. It can lower my heart rate 5 to 8 beats a minute just by being in this more open posture. I got nothing blocking my elbows, so my elbows can be back from the center of my body, like you can see. And you see this little backrest is really narrow here. And that's relaxing my vagus nerve. It's reducing cortisol in my body and overall stress, which ends up doing all kinds of things. Down to metabolic shutdown syndrome, which spikes your blood glucose level. And yeah, like you get the idea. It's pretty significant. So you really want to have a good chair. And so the thing that I've been most happy about and irritated about is, one, I was really happy we were able to figure all this out and have all this really groundbreaking medical information to design really unique chairs. And I know they were really good because 9 companies ended up copying us and we kind of led the industry in chair design. But we were happy in Silicon Valley and we were selling thousands of chairs to the top companies and computer people. And so most of America doesn't really know about us, even though we've shipped tens of thousands of chairs all across the country and the world over the last 30 years since we founded the company to do that. And so sadly, these mesh chairs, mesh back chairs, ended up getting a lot of marketing potential behind them. And that became kind of like the status thing to get. And there went the human race in this trajectory of, again, putting looks over function. And that's the thing that I've been most disturbed by. And actually, I kind of punish myself because it's like, I know all this information. I'm considered one of the most knowledgeable people in the ergonomic world. And when COVID started and people were tasked to go home and set up their home offices, I didn't have the sense to get online and get on Good Morning America and everything else and say, hey, America, these are like the 3 or 4 things you need to know to set up your home office to optimize your health and not compromise your health. So I apologize to everybody that I didn't do that, and I'll correct that here in the next few minutes. All right.
Well, yeah, going back to the beginning of the pandemic. I immediately thought, because I worked in the healthcare industry for quite a long time. Ran multi-site clinics, and I brought in ergonomic assessment people to make sure that everybody was, working the best that they could.
Yeah.
People are habitual, and they're like,
Yeah.
no, I'm gonna lift this. No, it's like you have the keyboard tray, and then you see the keyboard on top of the desk and not in the tray, and you just go, there's only so many battles I can fight in a day. And like, that's your choice. Okay, but I'm going to make a note of it,
Yeah.
just in case something comes back. But when we were all sent home in March 2020, my initial thought right away was, oh boy, there's going to be all kinds of people that are going to need not only mental health guidance from what is transpired, but they're
Yeah.
going to need a lot of physical therapy and help because their couch is not ergonomic. Crouched up like this on their laptop doing this, or
Yeah.
sitting at their dining room table, which is elevated so their shoulders are like this and the tension there, or they're looking down like that, and the
Yeah.
back of their neck's going to be sore, and they're not going to be thinking about getting up for breaks. And that was the other thing too, is like, because it was, people would sit longer at home than they would at work, because they didn't have the visual cues, they didn't have the built-in breaks, they didn't have the, hey, can we go over something real quick, and you get up and you move around. When you
Yeah.
were home and everything was on Teams or Zoom or all that, you were staring at a screen all day and you weren't moving. So I'm actually surprised. I'm sure there's been studies, and I know you'd have access to that, about how damaging the pandemic, at least in that first year when most people were working remotely, and even up till today, where there's still a decent percentage of people that are still working remotely, didn't take into consideration, okay, what do I need to do to make things as ergonomic as possible? Because if I don't, then it might be down the road a little bit, or it might be a lot sooner, where they realize, okay, my body is aching. I'm home. I should be relaxed and feel better, but I ache more at home than I did when I went into the office all the time. So don't beat yourself up for not, being on Good Morning America to talk to people about that. The time is still present. People should be doing this anyway, even if they only work remotely, maybe one day a week, or maybe they never work home or work at home. But if they've got a computer that they use, a desk or whatever, they should make sure that wherever they're sitting, whether it's in an office or at home, that things are ergonomically best for them, so they can avoid the physical ailments. Because I know, I've seen it, how connected our bodies are. If we take care of ourselves from a food standpoint and a motion and movement standpoint, and make sure that we're sitting properly and good posture and all of that, it helps your body do the things it's designed to do. But if you're crouched over, well, guess what? Blood flow's not flowing as well. And what does that do? That has a ripple effect that can cause all kinds of different challenges for you.
Yeah. Exactly. So this maybe I'll call like the really pragmatic, useful part of this interview. And that is the top tips everybody should know to set up their home offices and have their health, well-being, longevity most positively impacted. So fortunately, people have kind of begun to understood that it's not just aging, it's not taking care of yourself that can result in you being hunched over or immobile or have XYZ bunch of diseases because you didn't do X, Y, and Z between 30 and 60. And so we have this thing, bionomics, which we replace the word ergonomics. Ergonomics literally means laws for work, nomos being laws, ergo being work. And bionomics is laws for life. Because we quickly saw that, yeah, we can give people a perfect chair and all that, but how they sleep, what bed they're sleeping on, how they eat, how aware they are of their internal muscle tension states and what they're doing about that are all aspects that are affected throughout their day. And if they don't do something about all those things, they're not going to get this optimal performance. So when I talk to people about all this, I'm really talking about everybody from the peak performer that wants to do their best and just blow the doors off of everything and be super successful, all the way to the person that's injured, either facing surgery or had surgery, and they need to get better from their injury. And we started with those people, like pharmacists dispensing chairs for them. And lo and behold, what's best for them is best for the peak performers and everybody in between. So, as far as setting up a home office or regular office, first thing everybody should know is there's two worlds you can live in. There's the traditional world where you sit upright like a secretary kind of posture that you have in your head. You're sitting upright, your keyboard is down close to your lap, and you're looking at the monitor and you're just typing all day and you don't have to look at your keyboard. And your body, torso, thighs, like at a 90-degree angle, you got that little backrest holding your back. That works for some people, it doesn't work for others. And it's really detrimental, it's a bad idea to force yourself into one or the other. So the second world is you don't touch type, you really look at the keyboard often, and you have tighter hamstring and lower back muscles, and you tend to slouch. So most people can self-identify, oh yeah, that's me, or this is me, right? So by biological difference, men are often in the slouch category, and it's not because they're lazy, it's because our tendons and ligaments are tied together differently than in women's hips. So we tend to want to open that body angle, and that's what that's about. It's not to be lazy or, it's just the body wants to be at a more open angle of about 127 degrees. So first, figure out what world you're going to live in. That determines how you're going to set up your office space. Second thing is you don't want to put yourself in one hole all day, being you don't want to just sit all day or just stand all day. Sometime 15, 20 years ago, the idea sitting is the new smoking came out as a little catchphrase in the media, right? And yeah, it's not sitting that's so bad. It's not moving that's so bad. And, like humans often do, we're kind of binary and we go from one extreme to the other. And suddenly everybody's like, oh, I've got to stand all day. Yeah, well, that has its whole set of problems as well. And it's bad for you to stand all day. So we actually started using what we call sit stand height adjustable tables back in 1997 when nobody cared. And we found out pretty quickly that what was ideal for people is to sit upright for 15, 20, 25 minutes. You'll start to feel it if you're paying attention to your body. And hopefully, one gift I want everybody to have from this is learn to pay attention to your body and what it's feeling, what it's telling you. That's your sensor. That's your data, right? Real-time data. And you'll notice, oh, I'm feeling fatigued here or there. So then we would recline for 15, 20 minutes. And we go, oh, wow, that's getting a load off my lower spine. The spinal fluid can move around. I'm decompressing the discs. All kinds of great anatomical things are happening when you recline. Okay? But you have to have a workstation that works with that. So ideally, you've got a monitor arm that pulls your monitor close to your eyes. I have that sort of thing here, right? It's now close to my eyes, and I can lean back, and I can sit here, and I can have the keyboard on my lap. So I don't have to stretch my arms out. Nobody pays me to hold my arms up all day. And that would just put a whole bunch of tension over here. I'd be starving my hands for blood. So toxins would get built up, nutrients wouldn't get in, and inflammation would start, and you'd end up with an injury over time if you're really not taking care of yourself. So those are some of the things you have to make sure you're doing or having to accommodate that switch from upright to reclined. And then that's going to get tiring after a little while as well. Well, pop up and stand. Get your desk up high, type, You're going to feel reinvigorated. Your energy is going to be flowing again. But in 15, 20, 25 minutes, you're going to start noting your feet are feeling a little tired, swollen even. Sit down again, sit upright. You reinvigorated, you get into your work, off you go. And you can cycle through that all day and you'll get way more done. You'll stay way more focused. Uh, yeah, you'll optimize your health in a whole bunch of ways, like I talked about earlier, not just preventing repetitive strain injuries or sciatica in your leg or lower back pain or migraines, but overall stress, organ function of every sort in your body because you're able to keep breathing more regularly. And again, pay attention to what you're doing. Many of us breathe very shallow. You're it's kind of an exaggeration, but you're almost killing yourself. Certain types of breathing can stimulate stem cell production. Wrong kinds of breathing develops more cortisol and slows down your metabolism. So really mind your breathing. And if you hum, you can just sit and work and go, really good studies show you can up level the production of nitric oxide by 20 times. And that's essential for opening all of your veins and arteries to get blood flow to all your parts of your body. That's 100% associated with health and longevity. And this is from like Nobel Prize winning doctors, researchers that discovered the importance of nitrous oxide. Sometimes people understand it's part of erectile dysfunction and all of that sort of thing because it's very much related to that. But this is how deep all of this sort of stuff can go if you're really looking at bionomics rather than just ergonomics and what I'm doing at my desk for a few hours a day. So that's really the gift I want to give people, that overall awareness of these things that people can do. So at least breathe better, close your mouth, nice long deep breaths. Ideally, you have a chair like what we designed that allows you to open up your chest so that it facilitates and encourages that deeper breathing, that reduction in cortisol, overall stress, balance of the vagus nerve, et cetera, et cetera. And you want to start with a chair when you're doing your home office because you want to have ideally your feet on the ground and that your chair is to your size. And all of our chairs come in like 3 sizes. And for special cases, people who have injuries or genetic issues or anything like that, we custom make them to fit you perfectly. But at least you got to have the right size. And these are the 3 things you need to know to select a chair. You want to match your body size and shape. You want to match your work style, which is what you're doing and how you're doing it. Are you sitting upright or reclined? There's 2 different worlds of sitting. Are you sitting for a long period of time, short period of time? Are you typing? Are you doing lab work, assembly work? Sitting upright forward because of that, or you're able to recline? All those factors, you really want to be aware of them because that's going to determine the height and size of backrest, size of seat, type of mechanism that you can rock or if you don't need to rock, etc. And then the third factor is any specific comfort or injury issues that you need to address. And with those 3 factors, you can ideally pick a chair that works well for you and then build out the rest of your workstation from there. And one kind of hack or easy trick, you don't have to spend $1,000 on a sit stand table or whatever the costs are these days. You can just set up your desk so that it's at standing height automatically. Great, you save some money, but what's really cool about it, you're automatically incentivized to stand because when you come up to your desk, it's right there. You can start typing. It's a lot easier to feel fatigue in your feet and then have your chair actually be like at drafting height where you got a foot ring on it and you hop onto the chair once you get tired enough and you don't have to adjust the table. Because, dirty secret of the industry, 85% of the height adjustable desks never get adjusted. So you got the fancy buttons, you got the motors and the legs, and you don't get the benefit. But you look cool, and you can tell your friends, yeah, I got a height adjustable desk. So again, emphasis on the importance of the chair that you select and how you set up your workstation.
And I love that. And yeah, I know a lot of people. My last office opportunity, well, actually, I have a standing desk in the other room. that I use when I'm not in, using. I bounce around where I record the show a little bit, and I do that just for my body. It's like I'm gonna do this one this way today, or I'm gonna do this, but you mix it all up. But I know colleagues of mine that have the standing desk, and it's a motorized one too, so you don't have to crank anything. You just press a button. And I'll say, "What button is it?" And you can look at it, and it's still got the factory tape over it,
Yeah.
the shipping and all that. It's like you, yeah, either A, you've never taken, and I look at the rest of the table because I'm like, oh, maybe he just doesn't take like whatever. That's his off, but it's still just like, what's with the tape? I never gonna bother to take it. It's like if I dust this for fingerprints, will I find yours? And you probably not. This is my right height. I'm like, yeah, but even our heights change a little bit over time. Some days just because of gravity and everything else. So like, okay, I'm not going to judge, but you'd think you'd do that. So, no, this has been great. We're gonna segue over into part two because I want to make sure we spend time on the market analysis and also the book. So, we're gonna start part two of the interview and. Um, One of the things that I understand about you in our conversation so far today is how inquisitive you are, and I think that's natural for architects. I know architects, and that just seems to be a common DNA trait. Is there's a curiosity. Yes, you understand design and shapes and how things work together and all of that, but there's a curiosity component to it, and your curiosity has created this entire journey that you've had and have with this industry where people quite frankly can have a comfortable experience um, with all the things that we do in life, not just at work, but in life together. So let's talk about that market analysis because you mentioned it in part one. Let's dive into that a little bit. What are some of the findings that you've been seeing, throughout your career and even most recently?
Sure. So yeah, you're right. My favorite book when I was growing up as a kid was Tell Me Why. So I've been curious my entire life. And so this market analysis, this is really one of the most important things that anybody in the human race should ever know. And I can't emphasize that enough. A smart guy named Tony Robbins would say one of the most important things we can do is be good at pattern recognition. And there's a book that you could say is being used to run the world over the last 40 years, 30 years. One of those books, actually, there's two, but one is called The Fourth Turning. And why is that important? It's a pattern. It was a pattern of a 4 generation cycle. Every 20 to 25 years, there'd be a generation and it'd have a particular character. And the next one would have its own character and relationship to the previous one. And this goes on for 4 generations. And then there's a big change between the end of the fourth one and the beginning of the first one. Bill Clinton, Tony Robbins, Ray Dalio, all these famous billionaire people all have read or read this book and understand that this is how the world is unfolding today. So every major war, economic cataclysm, etc., matches this pattern structure of timing. You can go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years. This was discovered by the pre-Romans. And so what's important about what I'm going to tell you about is I discovered, because of my curious mind and wanting to figure out how the world worked, a bigger, more fundamental pattern. And that's what ended up I could use as a market analysis tool that made me understand that ergonomics would be important to people in the 90s and on. So that pattern is really simple. Everybody can understand it. The most important pattern for everybody to know is the developmental stages that each human being goes through from birth to death. And depending on who you are, there's 7 to 8 of them. Infancy, early childhood, late childhood, early adolescence, late adolescence, early maturity, late maturity. What's super important about that is that if you study all these things like I do, and I discovered it initially because I had in my mind, I had a photographic memory, I was lucky, all the art and architectural history for the entire human race from studying art and architectural history in architecture school. And what I saw was those different developmental stages expressed in the art and architecture over the thousands of years. So that drives the creation of our worldview and our value and belief structures. And they change in unison when we switch from one developmental stage to the next. So the Aboriginal peoples of the Kalahari or Australia, for example, they developed and arose during a time when the human species happened to be in infancy, before what is called the initial perception of separateness. Between the age of 3 months, 6 months, and 3 years of age, all of us human organisms have this experience of, oh, this is me, and this is an other thing, a blankie, a mommy, a bottle, whatever it is. And this ends up shaping our entire worldview. At that moment, if everything's peaceful and safe and happy, we imprint in our neural net, oh, the universe, all others are not threatening. It's happy, it's peaceful, it's supportive, nurturing. If that happens in a moment when you're scared, terrified, confused, etc., you imprint on your neural net as a first big impression of the other. It's scary, dangerous, and potentially threatening. So many of us go around in our adulthood automatically, unconsciously defaulting to one or the other, and we don't even know why. But it makes a big deal if you're, running a company or a nation, and your default is automatically everybody's an enemy versus everybody's my potential friend. Right? You come from, it's a really big deal. So the next big thing everybody needs to know is that between the age of 7 and 11, all of us neat human organisms switch from feeling the world kinesthetically to visually and cognitively perceiving it. This is where we start really solidly building the map of the world in our head. And it's where the linear binary logic of the brain really takes over. And we're operating more and more like a computer, ones and zeros, yes and no, right and left, on and off. And that scientific reductionistic thinking style really predominates. And you can see how this going from one stage to the other unfolded in the human race if you just start studying history. And this really, understanding this pattern of, let's say, the last 40,000 years of human history, and overlay on that the different developmental stages we go through. So from 40,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago, it was early infancy before the perception of separateness. The Aborigines were really happy in dream time, just being one with everything, because that's what an infant does. That's what our overall physiology supports and is into. It's not that they couldn't develop further. That's just all that was needed at the time. In our brain, we learned about neuroplasticity and what our brains can do. Anyway, over time, as we get higher densities of populations and things like that, it forces us to go through these developmental stages. So that 7 to 11 stage is actually kind of codified in history, because most people have heard of this phrase, I think, therefore I am. Why of all things do we remember that versus 1,000 other things we could remember or be taught, right? Well, it was codifying, or it's in the living memory of the human species in the West, that we switched from kinesthetic, I feel, therefore I am, to I think, therefore I am, which is great. And you get all these benefits of, scientific method and all those things, but the body starts to get left behind. And I saw that as we went through the different stages, that with the computer and the United States and the West primarily being what you could say the representation of the adolescent stage of the human species, we would be really creative cognitively, mentally. So no surprise, we're the birthplace of oodles of great inventions that have been shaping the world for decades. But our body would be left behind. because we're in our heads, we're thinking about things, we're inventing, we're being number one, we got testosterone, we're full of ourselves, we, we're high adolescence, and the body gets left behind. So that was how I understood this and saw it and used this pattern understanding as a marketing tool, market analysis tool to see, oh, yeah, all these products are going to be bad for our bodies in general because the message we get for societally, culturally, that's influencing our values and beliefs are saying ignore the body, ignore the body, ignore the body. And we were going to be using it really intensely in these computers and things, and that was going to be really bad for us. So there was going to be a need arising for actually really anatomically designed ergonomic products. And this could be used for understanding really every market and every industry. And in this book that I'm finishing, I have actually letters to each of the dominant institutions of the planet, explaining to them why they were successful based on the arising of the adolescent stage of human development, why they've been having recurring crises and failing right and left, and what new developmental stage has been arising that other companies have been arising and maybe replacing them or doing better because they match that new developmental stage. And that can explain things like why Campbell Soup Company ended up with millions of dollars of plant and equipment for products that nobody really wanted anymore, and they didn't anticipate like $10 kombucha being popular. I I could explain all that stuff for decades. So I'm really looking forward to educating people on all this stuff because knowing these developmental stages in us individually and as cultures as a whole will optimize our understanding of ourselves and the world and our performance and our ability to resolve conflicts and get to a world of incredible functionality and abundance better than just about anything else we're doing. So that's the
Yeah.
pattern that's really good for people to know.
Yeah, and I think knowing that pattern, I could be wrong on this, but I think we would get along better. I know that's
100%.
very, it's kind of simplistic in a way, but what I'm seeing in the world, and since, well, as long you can go back into history and you see the conflicts and the challenges that humanity faces, that is pretty much self-created in a variety of different forms. I think that it's this tug of war in a way of using or not using our heads, depending on how you want to look at it, in a way that is kind of a separating from the physical of things and just in making noise for the sake of noise and instead of understanding like the research you have and long standing and yeah, definitely I'll have a link for the fourth turning in the show notes as well because as humans we tend to want to obviously learn more. We want to see what's next kind of thing, and having a better grasp of how things work, you're going to be able to see what's next before it even happens because you're better in tune with how things are, how things are designed. When I see it could be something simple, it's like, people say, well, I didn't see that coming. And, depending on what it is, it's like, oh, I'm not surprised by this because I saw, it could be the work situation. I saw this happen and this happen and this happen. So I anticipated this was likely going to be the outcome based on what I saw. And people are like, I didn't see it. I'm like, why didn't you see it? And I guess it just depends on how in tune people are with their surroundings, their experiences, and whatnot. And are they, are they, you know, f- maybe it's a case where some people are a little bit more feeling than thinking on things, these things. And it's something I know. I've got family members that are like that, and they just know on things, and it's like, why? Well, I just know. I'm like, okay, you have insider information. Why don't you share? That's not the case. It's just they just are, it's just how they're geared, and they've been able to maximize that in their life. And I'm really looking forward to this book coming out because I think I know it's going to be eye opening and refreshing for people to kind of get a little more in what has happened, what's happening, what will happen, in a way that, not that they can prepare like you would, like having a pantry of extra goods or things like that, but in a way a lot like that. And I think it helps us navigate the world and life better if we have a better understanding of how things are and how they will be.
Yeah, 100%. That's why the title of the book, and a website that I'm putting up is actually where do we go from here.tv, because I'll have a variety of videos on it explaining all these things to people so they can get that understanding of the pattern and be able to see, like you were saying, more of what's next and why. So the other really super important thing everybody should know, and this is more important than IQ or EQ, and maybe even more important than pattern recognition, is the ability to have what's called metacognition. There was a recent article that said it's probably the most important type of intelligence a human being can have is metacognition. What that means is being able to see and understand different worldviews, different perspectives, different ways that people can look at things. And so, again, going to these developmental stages, a human organism can't really develop that well until our frontal lobes grow out. With our frontal lobes growing out, that's the executive function of the brain. It allows you to develop a third party independent observer sort of a function. I can't emphasize how big of a deal this is. Actuaries at life insurance companies will tell you you charge higher insurance to people under 25 because they don't have emotional impulse control and they get in accidents more often than the people that are older, right? So, anyway, you get this frontal lobes growing out. It takes a few years to integrate that to start functioning. If you do something called Vipassana meditation, that's an actual exercise, like you're doing arm curls to develop your bicep. You do Vipassana meditation to develop the independent third party observer function of your brain. It's almost like you've been walking around in the dark in a village you've never been to before, and just there's no moon out, there's no street lights, you're just putting your hands on the walls trying to make it through, whatever, downtown Venice, and you're just walking, hitting things all the time. But eventually you kind of figure out where things are. But what a difference it is if it's suddenly daylight and you get in a helicopter and you start going up and you suddenly are able to look down and see how everything is laid out and connected. And suddenly you see, oh, that's connected to that, and that's laid out over there because of this, and this is laid out over there because of this. It's the same exact thing with understanding this pattern and having this metacognition ability that I just mentioned. That's the incredibly huge difference that can happen for all of us human beings. I think, kind of most importantly, are like the people that you could say run the world, that are in charge of making the big asset allocation decisions, whether they're heads of state, heads of corporations, investment funds. They're working on these maps that all of us humans have been developing. And guess what? In many cases, those maps are partial or wrong because they're mental models that sometimes are not matching reality and the physical existence that we find most real. But hey, they're smart, they're successful, they don't have reason to question it, so they're doing what they're doing. Well, how is that working out, everybody? We got wars, economic collapses, healthcare issues, the crises in every industry that we have.
Hmm.
You give me another hour to talk about it, and I'll explain exactly why each of those has been happening and how to fix them. Based on understanding this pattern, matching the developmental stage, and the value and the belief structures that come out of that, Yeah, we get what Peter Diamandis would say, or Elon Musk is even saying, a world of abundance where most of the people on the planet, or all, can have a high universal basic income, rather than all of these things of everybody butting our heads against the wall and not understanding each other. Because when you get that metacognition ability, it's the tool you need to get the dream of inclusion that everybody talks about in the last 10, 15 years in corporations and in nations. We want to not be judgmental, we want to include rather than segregate. We want to understand each other. Yeah, you got that third party independent observer function. You can see, oh, this person or these group of people or this nation is in this developmental stage. And actually, that's important. And they have things to teach us because each developmental stage has strengths and weaknesses. And if you cut out one of those from your personal development, you end up being stunted for your entire life. So you might be that super successful, cocky, powerful adolescent that thinks magical thinking of their kid brother or sister is stupid and irrelevant. But understanding magic is kind of understanding quantum physics in a way, if you really get into it. And having a sense that you are one with everything, like an infant had, really smooths out a lot of potential antagonisms and oppositional relationships if you have that in a healthy way, that potential others are friendly versus threats, and you get a whole bunch of things that change and shift in our minds so that we can respect and understand each culture, have an open dialogue, understanding and integrating all of the strengths of each culture, from the Aborigines to the tribal people to the feudal lords and on to us, the modern people, in high adolescence. And we get to switch to that early maturity, which is reintegrating all of the previous developmental stages. It's like you're at your therapist's office and you're going to heal your inner child and work out all your traumas from all your previous stages. Now you can be a fully functional, firing on all eight cylinders adult. Or you can be an adult that self sabotages, crashes and burns at 40 or 50 or 60, has problems with addictions, et cetera, et cetera, or an entire culture that has all those problems, or a corporation.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities, and my hope and goal for everybody is to take advantage of those things. This could sound cheesy, but level up. There's so many of us that are playing small and playing safe, and the world needs us all to level up. So, Christopher, I've loved these conversations. Where can people find out about you? The book, I know you had mentioned, is coming out relatively soon, and the website, but once again, why don't you share those for us?
Sure, they can find out about our chairs and help their physical performance and well-being at somaergo.com, somaergo.com. A fun thing that kind of leads you into this book that I was talking about and this pattern that's so essential for everybody to know. Scroll down to the bottom of the home page at somaergo.com, and you'll see a logo that says Evolve. And it's got little diagrams of the different stages of human evolution in chair design, from squatting to a stump to a throne to a ergonomic chair to a healthy ergonomic neutral posture oriented chair like what we make. And then, like I said, where do we go from here.tv will be up and running here shortly, and they can learn more about that and in-depth workshop webinars that I'll give to people, because it's one thing to cognitively be introduced to this. It's another entirely to develop that third-party observer and to actually think in these new ways and shift your worldview and be able to think this way, so you can actually, it's the only way you can actually make better decisions. Because you got to understand context to make the most accurate decisions that'll be successful long term.
Great stuff. So, Christopher, like I said, I'll have all that in the show notes. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for giving us all of this beautiful knowledge, and I highly encourage people, obviously the book and so we're gonna buy them. So again, Christopher, thank you again.
Yes, great pleasure. Enjoy.